fall into the unlawful or unauthorized person category, even though they came in with a visa to start with. So this category that we're talking about, it's 24.5% they estimate. That includes everybody who is here without any documents because they came in without having status. And it also includes people who are here and who are no longer in status because maybe something happened in their life to change the valid category they were in, and it's expired in some way or another. They violated their status under the immigration laws.
Stuff I think you guys probably are more in tune with, and we can distribute the slides after, but it just is highlighting the contributions of foreign-born immigrants in Washington in the different sectors. But I think in the interest of time, we'll kind of skip over that one. And this is along the same thing, contributions. I always find that Social Security statistical puzzle. You were discussing that with me today.
$1.2 trillion. That's how much has been paid that they haven't been able to allocate because the Social Security numbers don't match. So they estimate that a lot, if not most of that, is from people who are undocumented and are working, are paying money into the system to the tune of $1.2 trillion. And this is a statistic from the Social Security Office from 2016. So when people say that immigrants don't pull their weight and they don't pay taxes, there is a number that's kept by the federal government that shows that people have been paying their taxes and they haven't even got credit for them.
I think we can safely say the majority of the people we work with, I rarely come across someone who hasn't filed taxes, at least once they learned about how to do it. So that's a large misconception. And so this is just basic terminology that you may or may not be familiar with. So the non-immigrant population, and typically you can divide, you might hear the terms non-immigrant and immigrant programs, so immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. And what that refers to, a non-immigrant visa they're temporary in nature. So students, people coming here to study for a temporary period of time, visitors coming to visit for a temporary period of time. There's a variety of employment-based visas that are also temporary, short-term, and those are distinguishable from the immigrant, which is actually down at the bottom, but immigrant visas and immigrant population are people who are seeking to acquire a permanent residency status here. So somebody who's married to a U.S. citizen and they want to apply for lawful permanent residency, they're an intending immigrant under an immigrant versus non-immigrant. So it's a little wordy, but those are distinctions that you might hear. And on this slide as well, I sort of mentioned that. So a lawful permanent resident is somebody, that is the term for a green card holder. So somebody who, and there are various avenues, various ways to get a green card as we know it, even though they're not green anymore, a lawful permanent resident card. And then of course we have citizens of the U.S., some by birth, some have derived citizenship from their parents, even though they weren't born here, and some also naturalized, which is the process of, I went through naturalization. I was born in Canada, so first you become a green card holder typically, and then you can apply for citizenship through a process called naturalization. And then we have undocumented person, aliens or persons. Aliens is always one that makes me laugh. I feel like around little things, but anyway, an illegal alien, I prefer to say an undocumented human, but people who overstay, like Carol mentioned, a lawful visa program, and they lapse out of lawful status, and that happens for a variety of reasons, or people who entered the country without inspection, meaning or without documentation, permission to do so, are referred to as undocumented. If you hear people saying, illegal alien, we could suggest the ultimate term because I think it's harsh. Yeah, thanks. For lack of a better word. And so these are just terminology again, vocabulary as we go through. Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So when you look at the book, and we meant to bring the book, and we ended up with too much other stuff.
Too much coffee.
We ended up with coffee instead. The Immigration and Nationality Act is about 3 inches thick, and it has it references lots of different categories. It has definitions in it. People who are not citizens are referred to as aliens. So either you're a citizen or you're an alien. So if you have a green card, you're an alien. If you're undocumented, you're an alien. If you're a visitor, you're an alien. And if you remember going through the airports in the past, especially Seattle, it just cracked me up because I'd always see the sign that said citizens and aliens, and I was just, you think of Men in Black, and you're looking for all the aliens, and there isn't any coming in. But they've softened it a little bit to list, permanent residents and visitors, so it's not quite as harsh as it was, because it really is kind of it's an old term, but it's a legal term, and everyone who isn't a citizen is considered an alien under the immigration laws. So everybody, right? So once you become a citizen, you're a citizen, but up to the moment that you take that oath, or up to the moment that sometimes your parent takes an oath and you automatically become a citizen. So when we are talking to people, what we do in our job is we have somebody come into our office and we sit down with them and we educate them about immigration law, but we also talk to them about what their options might be. And we always look at these things. Is there any way you could be a citizen? Because people always think about, well, you're born here, you're a citizen. Yeah, you are. And then you also hear, well, we should take that away. That shouldn't be enough. But I don't know if you guys are all aware, but in the countries where you don't get to be a citizen automatically, they have a lot of problems. And that's one of the problems they've had in Israel with the Palestinians, is there was no automatic right to citizenship from being born there. So if you have to derive it from somebody else, most of the Arab countries, in Japan it's that way. There's a lot of countries that require more than you're born there. Fortunately for us, the United States doesn't do that. Canada doesn't do that. Mexico doesn't do that. Most of South America, you can be born there and it's automatic. But the old world, the European world, the old Asian, and some of the African countries do require this, that you have this derivative citizenship through your parents. And so when you look at the United States law and they say we should change it, if you look at the places where you have the biggest problems in the world with a lot of these cultural issues, you can find out that they have really bad citizenship laws, and they don't have a way for a person who's born in the United States or born in their country, grew up in their country, went to school in their country, they turn 21, they go away for some reason, they can't get back in. And that's not something that we want to do. And if you ever hear people talking about, let's take away citizenship for people who are born here, I hope that you remember that, because if you do a little studying about that, you'll find out the level of problem that happens. A lot of people just don't think about that. But in the United States, we also allow people to get citizenship through this naturalization process. And that's also not true everywhere. In some other countries, they have it so that you can only get like a green card, and you always have this in-between status. You don't get to vote, you don't get to participate as fully in your country, because it's not really ever your country. You have this sort of in-between stage. But here in the United States, we've allowed people to get their green card, and we've made an opportunity for people to be able to apply for citizenship. And citizenship through naturalization is not automatic. It's not like, oh, I just sign a piece of paper and you get it. You get screened very thoroughly for it. You have to submit a 28-page application that they ask you all these questions about your whole life, going back to when you were a baby. Seriously. They look at your whole immigration history from everything you've ever done from the moment you arrived in the United States. And they screen you very carefully. And after 9/11, they changed a lot of the computer screening, in my opinion, for the better, so that they can really do adequate biometrics, so they know who people are. Now, sometimes that creates complications for us because we go to an interview and one of our clients hasn't been forthright about something, and they say, hey, guess what? They did go back and forth. And we try to get people to really tell us everything because we know it's going to show up. But I think all of us want a system that has this integrity, so that when people are who they say they are and their situation is what it should be. And since 9/11, when all the computers have shared information better, we actually get a lot more in-depth screening. And that happens with all immigrants, but especially when you're going to apply for citizenship. So it's not automatic. You have to go in, you get a test, you have this extensive background screening that's done even before you show up to talk to somebody. They do fingerprints, they do the photograph, and from the photograph they can find you now too, because the photograph screens for different things, and the fingerprint screen, and immigration, they've taken fingerprints for a very, very long time. At the border, they've taken one fingerprint and they've taken a photograph, and that's been since the 60s. So they've been updating all of their systems, and all this is starting to come into, even though it's, 60 years ago, some of it's just showing up now. So when people say you automatically get citizenship, I want you to understand it's complicated. Same thing with getting a green card. And we're going to talk about how some of that's done, but they're really different situations. So in the United States, you might be a citizen or an alien. And then with aliens, they're broken into lawful permanent residents, which are green card holders, non-immigrants, which are on a specific kind of visa that requires you to do certain things. They might be here from asylum, or they might be here because they're undocumented. So there's quite a few different categories, and when we talk to somebody, we're trying to figure out how they can fit in, and given their situation, can they apply for this, or can they apply for that, or do they meet the eligibility requirements, or are they disqualified for some reason? Because those are two different questions. You may be eligible for something, but that doesn't mean that you're not disqualified somehow on another basis. So we have to always look at the big picture and ask a lot of questions of our clients to try and figure it out. Yeah, no, talk about the agencies.
Okay, so more terminology, but this is something I usually go through with people that we meet with in our office as well, because there's a lot of confusion about immigration. I know a lot of people we work with think it's just one office of immigration, and I think the INS used to be more consolidated, but we don't have the INS anymore, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. So immigration, the authority, immigration law falls under several federal agencies, and actually Department of Labor is missing here. But the first and most significant perhaps is the Department of Homeland Security. And under the Department of Homeland Security, we have smaller agencies that are responsible for implementing and enforcing different areas of the immigration laws. The three important ones that you're probably going to hear the most about are USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. That is the benefit granting arm of the Department of Homeland Security. And when I say benefit granting, that is the agency where we apply, so individuals that want to apply for naturalization, or they want to apply for a green card, or various types of visas. Well, that's split up between the two. But anyway, certain applications, they send those to USCIS. CIS, there's an office locally in Tukwila, and they adjudicate. The best example and the most common perhaps that you may hear of are marriage-based applications when somebody is applying through a spouse and they have an interview. That's through USCIS. Also, like I said, citizenship applications are two examples. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is another agency within the Department of Homeland Security. I always describe it simply to my clients as one of the immigration police forces, because that's essentially what it is. They have blue uniforms, and they're responsible for enforcing the immigration laws primarily within the interior of the country. Up here in Mount Vernon, we have ICE and so I'll skip forward, so return to that. Customs and Border Protection, that is the third agency within Department of Homeland Security that is also, again, a law enforcement agency. La Migra, exactly. Distinct from ICE, some overlapping duties and powers there. CBP actually has multiple agencies under it as well to complicate things further, but what we're familiar with here would be the Border Patrol, and they have green uniforms, and they are responsible for protecting the borders, and specifically with the population we work with here, many individuals in Skagit have a great fear of the Border Patrol. And there is a lot of confusion between Border Patrol and ICE, because up in this area, since we are geographically near the border, we have a robust Border Patrol presence and ICE. ICE typically would be more workplace raids, would be doing more, they are responsible for targeted operations typically if they're looking for specific fugitive officer, a specific individual, and they're going to that person's home, that's ICE. But Border Patrol, again, they're also up here. And then under CBP, we have field operations, and they're the folks that are in the booths up at the border and at the airports when you get off a plane. They're in blue as well, but they're a part of CBP, different than Border Patrol. They're the ones that are regulating immigrant flows. I guess I should say lawful immigrant flows into the country, whereas Border Patrol is focused on apprehending those who are usually trying to enter without permission or here without permission. So Department of Justice, completely separate agency department, and that is where we have our Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is the immigration court system. And I always try to explain to clients too that these are distinct agencies, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice. And someone may have no options right now under the programs that are available under Department of Homeland Security, but sometimes, and we're going to talk about this later, if they have contact with immigration and are then referred over to the immigration court process for what we call removal proceedings under the Department of Justice, there may be different options available because there's different programs, it's different rules, it's a totally separate system. So it's hard to summarize that quickly, but the immigration court, basically we have, immigration courts are where people go when they're, for a variety of reasons, but basically when they're, caught here without permission. We're going to talk about how people get sent to the Northwest Detention Center often, and then certain individuals can get out of the Northwest Detention Center and fight a case before an immigration court. There's also an immigration court in the detention center that hears detained cases. So, some people have a right to have a case in front of an immigration judge, and some don't, and that's very fact specific, and more than we can probably cover at this point. But basically, if people have that right to present a case before an immigration judge, and they lose, there's an appeal, Board of Immigration Appeals is the appellate body responsible for hearing decisions that come out of the immigration court. And then from there, we go into the federal court system with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and onwards to the Supreme Court, I suppose, if you're really motivated. And then Department of State is the embassies and consulates. So they're also responsible for issuing visas for individuals who are trying to come to the country from abroad. We work with a lot of people who may be married to somebody, and although their spouse is here, they're not eligible to do the whole process here, so they have to go through part of the process here in the U.S. and then complete with an interview in the consulate in their home country. We work a lot with the consulate in Ciudad Juarez, where people are required for a variety of reasons. They may, usually because of the way they entered, to go back and have an interview in the consulate in their home country. So there's a lot of agencies, and it is complex. The Department of Labor is also involved in immigration, more on the employment-based visas, because they have the responsibility of certifying that the workforce won't be negatively impacted before granting an employment-based visa to somebody. And so that's a quick overview of the agencies. I just wanted to highlight those, and most importantly, I think the ICE and CBP presence here and the difference between those law enforcement bodies is good to have. Did you want to go any more on that?
No, I just
move on.
The other, what's interesting about immigration law is it's the Constitution. So as a lawyer, one of the things that was exciting to me was the Constitution. And we have these three branches of government, and we're dealing with them. And we in immigration law actually deal with them all the time. So a lot of other lawyers don't. So people who do family law or criminal law aren't necessarily dealing with all three agencies. So we deal with the executive branch because these agencies are all under the executive branch. We deal with proclamations that the president makes, like DACA, the Deferred Action for the Dreamers. And there's lots of other things that the president does that you see from time to time over the history of this country. And then we have all those agencies. We actually have the courts that are under the executive branch, so they're administrative courts. But then we deal with the other court systems. So you've seen that Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project has been really involved in filing lawsuits in the U.S. District Court, and they stopped the travel ban going into place several times. There's been appeals on lots of different issues. So if we have a case and our client is denied, or the government takes too long on something, or we feel like there's no other way to challenge a decision. Sometimes there's other ways and you have to use them first. You have to use up the available remedies. But we might go to federal court and we might file a lawsuit against the U.S. government asking them to take certain action or do something. Sometimes you have somebody who has a case, and in the past we've had cases where even under President Obama, they were taking a really, really long time to approve citizenship cases for people from Muslim countries. A long time. I think part of it was they were having difficulties completing the biometrics, but at some point, when 5 or 6 years goes by, too much time has passed. It's supposed to be done in around 6-8 months, and if you've been waiting 5 or 6 years, they should be done, or they should say you don't qualify for this reason. And so we've had to file a lawsuit in federal court on some of those cases to get them to just do something. And usually what they do is they look at their stuff and they say, oh, we really don't have anything. We're going to go ahead and approve it. So we access the federal court. And we also access the federal court because if immigration court rules against us and the Board of Immigration Appeals rules against us, we have the right to have a real court. Because those are courts that are administrative courts. They're not necessarily following all the same laws or rules that the circuit courts and the U.S. courts are following. So we want to get in front of those other courts. And we want to have an opportunity to argue something. And the other really great thing about going to those higher courts is if you win there and they publish the case, you affect not only your case, but everybody else who has the same circumstance. So it's a really great feeling when you have a case and you go in and you fight it and it has a broader impact. And you can also do that in district court, just like they did with the travel bans. But you can have that on an individual case as it goes up, and it has a broader impact on other cases. So we're dealing with this, and this is what is exciting about law and going into it. We're dealing with the Constitution. We deal with the judicial branch. We deal with the executive branch. And we deal with the legislative branch because all the immigration laws are established by the Congress. And then they are defined from there by regulations that are proposed by the different agencies depending on who it impacts. So every day of my life as a lawyer, I'm dealing with all three branches of government. So most people who do immigration law are really constitutional lawyers. And that's kind of exciting, and I feel like we're defenders of the law because we are representing for everyone, right? I mean, we want to make sure that all of the agencies, that we take advantage of all the different agencies and the opportunities that we have here and help our clients learn about them. So when we have clients that we're working with, they have learned about the Constitution. By the time they're ready to get their citizenship, they've already experienced. And it's kind of exciting to have that as part of your practice. So I consider us, a lot of people would say people who represent immigrants, they don't always say, oh, you're not a patriot. And I go, wait a second. We're doing the frontline work that we are the patriots because we're trying to have the government be the best it can be, following the law that's been set out. And that's an exciting place. And coming here, I hope you guys learn enough or a little bit about the law to pique your interest so that you dig a little bit deeper and look at these topics, and also that you talk to people who ever say, oh, you're defending an immigrant. Actually, you're a patriot. You're defending the laws. You're trying to make things right. And that's what we want to do.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that point where one of the things that we've seen a lot since the Trump election is clients coming in there's been a lot of fear in the community, and there's been a lot of panic, and there's been waves because there's been these adverse, attacks on the immigration system. And one of the things we try to remind people of is, look, yes, there are areas that fall under the executive, authority, and DACA, unfortunately, was one of them. But a lot of these programs we're going to talk about today, family-based immigration, humanitarian benefits for survivors of crime, for example, those are rooted in laws that we have, and we have the three branches, and the president, although his administration is obviously undermining a lot of our immigration protections, cannot change those laws, and that there are, again, in front of the immigration courts, there are applications that are based in laws that have been on the books for many years, and people have that right to apply for benefits under the program. So it's not all lost, and I think we have to remind people too of the rights that they continue to have, right? And that's a whole other topic on knowing your rights, but just to touch on. I think we were going to go quickly over work authorization and just what that means. You wanna go
Yeah,
into
so
that?
the ability to work in the United States it can be tied to a specific kind of visa, and it's actually set forth 8 CFR 274A, but it sets forth who can and cannot work in the United States. So in the United States, not everybody who's here is technically allowed to work. There's a lot of people who are working anyhow, but in order to be able to work, and this is why DACA was a big deal, is you need to have a specific permission, usually from the government. You get a little card with your picture on it. And green card holders obviously are authorized to work. There is a lot of different situations where people are allowed to get a work permit, including people who have applied for asylum after their application's pending for 6 months, if the judge doesn't decide. I mean, there's all these different little rules which are altered by all kinds of different little facts and laws that make things really difficult. But that's why when the deferred action for childhood arrivals was announced, it was such a wonderful thing because it allowed people to get a work permit, to make an application, to go through the screening process and get a work permit. Nothing was automatic. None of these immigration things are automatic. Just because you are married to a U.S. citizen doesn't make you a citizen. Nothing's automatic. It doesn't even mean that you can get your papers here in the United States.
Yeah, it's like it's getting the back of the line for that a lot. Why can't people just get to the back of the line? There's no line for a lot of people, and if there is, we're going to talk about later, it's a 25-year line already. And so I think there's a lot of misconception about the path to citizenship. It's already long and arduous and very restrictive. And so yeah, nothing is automatic and nothing is given like work, the work authorization.
And the other thing about the work authorization that's important, and I know that most of you are social workers and not necessarily employers, but when somebody is you have an employee and they're filling out an I-9, you cannot ask them for specific things. You can ask them you can provide a list of what they can give you, but you're not to ask them for specific things. And a recent session that I was at with the national conference, they were talking about, the federal folks were talking about how often there's discrimination that occurs and that there can even be a lawsuit by asking for specific items to be provided with the I-9 form. Because you don't know how somebody qualifies. They might be an asylee, they might have this or that, and you can't ask them to provide you with specific things. You can't say, give me your driver's license and your social security card, and that's good enough for me. Those are required, that would be sufficient for meeting the I-9 requirements if the Social Security has no words on it saying only with INS authorization. But you can't ask for that. You have to just say, provide me something from the list, and then they provide it. Because if you don't, then you're making generalizations about who they are and why they're filing and how they got their authorization to work, and you don't have the right to do that. So you have to give them an opportunity to provide anything from that list on the work permit. Once you have a work permit, you can go to the Social Security office and get a Social Security number. Now, sometimes people have had a Social Security number issued in the past. They got a bank account when they came as a student, and they were allowed to get a Social Security number, but now they're getting one to be able to work. So how it works in the United States is once you have a Social Security number, that's yours, it's yours forever. They're not going to give you a new one, they just give you a different card that says something different. So if it's a legitimate Social Security card, it's going to be your number for the rest of your life.
A quick question. I've seen EADs before. That's an employment
Authorization document.
That's the card.
And is that what you're calling a work permit?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, no.
That's a good
So,
question.
Employment authorization document is immigration slang, yes, for a work permit. And it is a specific, it looks sort of like our driver's licenses. It has a photograph on it. It says there's a validity date on it. It says it's good from this date to that date. Most of them are 1 year, sometimes they're 2 years. Certain people don't even need an employment authorization document. They can just do it pursuant to work. So, for example, if you're a foreign corner and you're working, come temporarily to work at Microsoft or work at university, you're probably coming on a specific visa that allows you to work, and that visa itself, you could take that to the Social Security office and get a number, and they'll allow it. So it really varies on whether you need one of these or not, but it's a lot easier for people to get jobs if they have one, because then they go to an employer and they don't know whether they can work or not. They say, hey, here's my card, and they go, okay, I'm an employer.
So these are kind of based on questions I think a lot of people have, and we just go over it quickly. These are not sufficient to paths or bases to apply for a green card for your lawful residency, permanent residency. And so, as we know with the first prong, having come to the U.S. at a young age, DACA was helping some of those folks. And we have to see what happens with that demographic, obviously, at this point. But, just having come here when you were very young, living in the U.S. for a very long time, having children under 21, being a very good, committed worker, and a wonderful person, and active. And we have concerned caring advocates and friends of immigrants call and say, well, can't you help this person? He's such a good person. He's my neighbor. He's lived here for 25 years. He has 3 kids. He volunteers at the church. He's always paid his taxes. There's got to be a way, and there isn't. And the last one, there isn't based solely on that. Those are all factors that often support other applications. They're factors that are requirements under certain programs that we have, but they're not in and of themselves sufficient to apply for some benefit. The last one is a question I hear all the time, and it's heartbreaking for me to say to people that really, that isn't enough, but having a serious medical condition or having a child with a serious medical condition is not in and of itself a basis. Again, that is something that is considered heavily in certain applications that we do before the immigration court, certain applications we do for what's called a waiver in family cases, but unfortunately it's not enough. Our programs are quite restrictive, and those are just common misconceptions.
So what happens a lot is people hear, well, like I said, I'm married to a U.S. citizen, aren't I fine? No, you're not fine. There's a whole long process. And most people that I've talked to in a group that are not working with immigrants directly, most of you guys are, but that don't work with a lot of immigrants, just assume that if you marry a U.S. citizen, of course you're going to have papers, and of course you're okay, and the government's not going to touch you, and nothing's going to happen. And there's a lot of false assumptions. These are some of the ones that are false because in and of themselves, they're not enough. It takes more. And I always equate immigration law, and I forgot to bring my little block here, to the little children's toy that has a star and a square and a triangle. If you want to get your papers, you have to fit into one of those categories in order to qualify. And oftentimes, they're not simple. Most of the time, they're not simple. And sometimes it seems like, well, this and this and this, isn't that enough? And it's shocking for people to realize that it's really not always enough. But it's our job to try and figure out how to get them in that box. And that's what we do. And so when we have different folks in different situations, we're looking at what one or more ways could they possibly try that might help, maybe not today, but maybe tomorrow. And the other thought I always try to leave people with is that in our country, we've historically had ways for people to earn the right to remain in the United States. When the United States was first formed, we were all immigrants, right? And then they made different rules for people who'd been there for a while. And they had exclusion laws, like the Chinese Exclusion Act. And we've gone back and forth with different rules. But the amnesty that last happened in 1986, that wasn't an unusual act. It was actually pretty common. Every 30 or 40 years, we get something, sometimes more often. So most of the folks, if they're good people and they've been here for a long time and they stay out of trouble, chances are that something's going to happen in their favor eventually. It's just a question of when. So having hope is important for folks because so many of the families that we deal with, that you guys deal with, are mixed families. They have citizens, they often children. They have children that sometimes are undocumented in the family. So you might have a child that's 15 and 12, and they both are citizens, and the 16-year-old came in, was born in Mexico and came in separately. And they're in a whole different situation than their other younger siblings. And then their parents. Maybe one of them has one citizen and one isn't. It really varies. So, or maybe it's an uncle or an aunt that's visiting. So most of the immigrant families that we deal with have all of these different categories. They have people who are undocumented, they have people who have a green card, they have people who are citizens, they might have somebody who's on a visa. It's a real combination. And so having hope that the people who are out of luck right now might have an opportunity is really important for these families and for our communities so that we know that we can continue to try and get the immigration laws to expand and to evaluate people properly, right? Because no one objects to the murderer getting deported to another country. But what we do object to is somebody who is here, contributes, is adding to our community, has been here for a while. Why shouldn't we have an opportunity for them somehow to come here? What can they do to earn it? And a lot of people don't like the word earn. But I always feel like it's not far-fetched because most of the people who are immigrants are earning it. You know, they're here, they're working hard, they're contributing to their community. So when you say earned, like they have to do something else, well, they're probably just going to do what they're already doing anyway because they already are earning it. So the earned immigration, that doesn't scare me. I feel like most immigrants are already there.
Yeah, and we'll move on, but quickly on that point of the assumption about if you're married to a U.S. citizen, that everything's going to be okay. I get that a lot too, and it's one of the areas I worry about. And if you guys have people you're working with that you hear that, and they're saying, I'm going to the consulate, I have my final appointment down in, for us it's often Ciudad Juarez, but it can be anywhere, El Salvador, or, you know, wherever, any country, Japan. Thank you. Sorry, I'm working a lot with a certain demographic. I have to mix up my consulates, but basically, people will go through the process on their own, and you know, immigration will take their money and process those visas all the way up into the point where they set that final interview for the person in, like I said, you know, Japan. And it's only when they get to the consulate and they have that interview that they're told, well, actually, you didn't qualify under the immigration laws for a myriad of reasons. You know, you lived there previously without permission, or you've triggered what we call this long list of inadmissibility bars. And then a lot of times it's, and you can't come back in for 10 years. And there's a separation now in the family. And those are heartbreaking situations. Some of you may have known people who've done that. And so it's one of those areas that, you know, we always try to get the word out that if you have done this process on your own, immigration's not going to flag that for you. You're going to find that out once you're back in your home country going to the appointment. So try to talk to someone licensed that can go over and understands the immigration laws, to go over it and say, whoa, actually, if you go, you're not getting back for 10 years. Because those are always really sad situations that we've seen. And an example, again, of how the system in certain areas is just not user-friendly. I mean, it's complicated. The laws are written in a very complex way, and it can be, again, devastating to the family when they think it's all fine because they've been on this list and going through these processes for over a year, and then, you know, the final answer is no.
And a lot of times where we find this problem is when notarios are involved or somebody who's trying to help. So one of the things that I would encourage you guys to do, is think about sending people for an evaluation and encouraging them to go to talk to somebody. So here in Skagit County, Catholic Community Services has 2 accredited representatives. They work for a nonprofit, and they will do an evaluation of someone's case, or if they're filing stuff and they're trying to figure it out, they'll do it. There are a number of attorneys that do this work in Skagit County. And Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project is the biggest nonprofit provider in Washington State, and they also will do evaluations, but they're very backed up, and it takes a long time to get in. But having that evaluation done, it makes a huge difference. So what's really sad to me is when I have somebody come, like a U.S. citizen wife is here, and she said, my husband, he's stuck in Mexico. I said, what happened? Well, he went down there, and then we found out that he had come back. So there's a law that says after 1980, after September of 1986, basically, 1996, if you leave, if you're here in the United States and you leave and you come back again, you're out of luck. You can't get papers until you go back and live in your home country for 10 years. So it's very hard to get around it. There are a few around, and one of them, this lady's going to talk about the crime victims, because the crime victims, there's actually an exception to the rule to get around it. And certain people who we can file for what's called cancellation of removal in deportation, but they can't just get here quickly, and if they're already in Mexico, we can't do the deportation, they're already gone. So they might not even be deported, but they left on their own. They got an appointment, they said, oh, I'm going to go down for my interview. And that going down for the interview triggered this event that makes it not possible for them to come back for 10 years. Sometimes they can qualify for filing for a waiver, forgive them for that, which requires a showing of extreme hardship to their spouse or their parents. It's hard to get. Sometimes they can't get anything. So yeah, it's 10 years. They're living apart from their family for 10 years. And notarios often send people down there and they don't know how to screen them properly. Sometimes people, and I see it really more in notarios than anybody else, because most folks, if you're trying to help somebody and you get in the middle of this, you're going to go, wait, this is too complicated, I'm going to send you to somebody else to do it. And I encourage you not to fill out papers for people. First of all, it violates the law because you're not authorized to do that. But secondly, if you are trying to help somebody and you end up being the cause of them never being able to get papers or having to wait 10 years outside the country, you will really regret that. And they need to see a lawyer. They need to see a lawyer who does immigration law too. Because immigration is one of the most complex areas of law. It's been compared to a labyrinth. I'm telling you this and this and this, and so I hope you understand a little bit about it is very complex. So it's super important that people get evaluated, that they know what they can and can't do. And you can encourage people to come to clinics and to get involved. And we often work with Catholic Community Service and set up clinics that we'll do in Skagit County where people can come in free, they'll get a chance to talk to an attorney. We try to set those up from time to time.
No. I was just going to say to that point about, we also hear a lot, and that's where it's like, yes, I know, but I have a brother, and he did it, and his case is the same, and there's no two cases that are exactly the same. And what Carol was saying about that entry-exit thing is so key. So much of what someone is eligible for depends on how they came and then what year, because like she said, post-96, there's different laws, and then there's other laws that are not retroactive. So a lot of somebody's eligibility depends so much on their personal details. And again, what program you're looking at, because I deal a lot with a program that we're going to talk about later, that there are exceptions to these problems, these bars. And but a lot of people, we have to look at exactly when and how and where you came in to be able to give that good opinion. And I think that, so we're going to talk a little bit about removal proceedings, and also referred to as deportation proceedings. So this is what happens. We talked earlier about the agencies. We have different federal agencies. So when somebody encounters one of the law enforcement branches of immigration, so typically here, Border Patrol or ICE, you may see an ICE raid in a workplace. You may see Border Patrol. I think Border Patrol activity has actually kind of improved over the last few years. I hesitate to say it out loud for some reason. I'm like, oh, I don't want to. But we've had a lot of issues in the past with, stops that were unconstitutional because they didn't have a valid basis for stopping people. So you had these situations where Border Patrol was, hanging around agricultural work sites and stopping people for no reason. And the reason was typically, their parents, which is not the constitutional reason to stop them. But nonetheless, they then arrest and detain the individual and made up in a removal proceeding. We're not seeing that as much, but it happens. We're near the border. We do have multiple different ways where people come in contact with immigration. And I'd say the most frequent or the most common way right now is if they have contact with the police. So if you're arrested on a DUI and taken to jail, that's going to prompt immigration is regularly in our jails, and that then will prompt a detention with immigration after your release. Not always, but that's a very common fact scenario, fact pattern. So when people get arrested by immigration because they are not here with permission, they're typically taken to the Northwest Detention Center. Under our current administration, the officers are under this, these new memorandums, this new policy to detain and arrest more people. So, where we had ebbs and flows in the past where sometimes if the individual they apprehended was a good person without criminal history, lived here for a long time, you see officers maybe saying, well, we're going to just, leave you today, or we're going to issue you a notice later to show up before a judge. What we're seeing now, and we think it's going to increase and continue, is more enforcement. So if they encounter someone, even if they're looking for someone else, they come across another person without papers, they're going to detain that individual and send them to, again, the Northwest Detention Center typically is where they're going to go. I think if it's a pregnant or nursing individual, sometimes they'll still avoid the detention situation. But people are then placed into removal proceedings. Not everybody has a right to talk to an immigration judge, and that goes back to, well, what is their history? There are people who, unfortunately, this is a fact pattern we see, that may have come in and out several times in their past and been stopped at the border in a year, depending on what year, right? But they basically received a deportation at the border. There are deportations that are non-judicial, not issued by a judge. There are post-97, this ability for, basically CBP officers who are at the borders to issue an expedited removal, which is an order that is essentially a deportation. And so there are people that already have one of those orders in their past that sometimes the result is if they have contact with immigration here in the U.S., they don't have the right to a full removal proceedings. The government can try to use that old order to move them out of the country more expeditiously. And there's a lot of discussion about them using those provisions even more aggressively now under the new administration. It doesn't mean they don't have any rights if they have one of those orders in their past, right? I mean,
But it's
asylum, but it's hard.
So
or
one of
withholding.
the areas of concern in our area is because with this, so there's different kinds of deportations, but principally the one you get is from the judge. But the ones that you get at the border, it's really scary because basically it's a deportation officer saying, oh, you're not here with permission, or we're going to, and you've been here less than a year. So they could potentially do that to anybody in the community. And so we've encouraged people to keep documents on them to show that they've been here at least 2 years, whether it's a driver's license that was issued 2 years ago or something, so that if they do have an encounter with the Border Patrol, that they won't just say, okay, guess what, you're deported, here's your ticket out.
There's a law in the books that
Allows
she's referring
that.
to, right, allows that if you haven't been here for 2 years. There's actually a way, and we've seen these
And
expedited.
within 100 miles of the border.
Right.
So we're within 100 miles of the border. So that's why we have to be more concerned about it than if you were in, the middle of it.
Yeah, so if, and we've seen, or we see expedited removal orders issued at the border, where they catch people trying to come in, or even the Canadian border where they catch someone perpetrating fraud, basically lying with fake documents or making a misrepresentation. But again, this concern that might be applied to people who are here, even in our communities, who encounter an immigration officer is a scary thought. Because again, from our point of view, there's no due process there. I mean, when you go for a judge, there's a procedure, right? You're advised of your rights. A lot of people, basically, the fact that immigration officers can do that is a little frightening, but anyhow, a good point to carry that proof on you that you have lived here for 2 years.
The other way people get a deportation, it's not always that somebody gets arrested at jail or they get arrested because they're undocumented. If you apply for a benefit under the immigration laws and they find that you're not eligible for it, they can then put you in deportation proceedings because without without getting that benefit, you no longer have the right to be here. So somebody who could be married to a U.S. citizen and otherwise qualifies to do the process locally, if for some reason they're denied, their case would be sent to a judge, and they would be potentially deported. It's also true for asylum. So I have a number of cases with people from different countries around the world where things are really bad, and they might apply for asylum. And you file for it affirmatively through USCIS. If USCIS doesn't agree that you should be granted asylum, then they would send you to a judge for a hearing on removal, at which point you again would repeat your story about why you believe you would be persecuted, your life is in danger, if you went back to your home country, and it would happen because of one of 5 grounds. So it can't be just any reason for asylum. It has to be race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or social group. And what is each one of these things? What's a political opinion? What's a social group? Is determined a lot by case law. So we're looking at what does the Ninth Circuit say? What does the Board of Immigration Appeals say? What does the Supreme Court say? So a lot of these things are, again, we're dealing with different parts of the Constitution, we're dealing with the judicial system and trying to determine whether this person has a claim. We've had a lot of kids, a lot of Central American kids that have been relocated up here with family members, or
There's a lot of, like Carol said,
the
that's
undocumented
something
children, and that's another thing that we've been dealing with a lot here.
unaccompanied minors who basically are fleeing, typically the Northern Triangle, but El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala is where we see most of these youth. And it's really, I feel like a more recent development, at least that we've been seeing more of them here in our community. And they're fleeing horrible situations and violence in their country, and they're ending up here unaccompanied, meaning they may be reuniting in some cases with a sibling. I have a few of those clients living with like a sister that's here or a brother, but they are in a very vulnerable situation. They need so much help. I mean, we work with, to do what we can do. I mean, we have some cases where we are just trying to help them stay in school and give them that support and try to, have them feel encouraged to study and also take care of their legal situation with them. But there are also some programs now that are specific to help these youth where we have, and I don't know if we want to go too much into that, but special immigrant juvenile status, where basically you can go into state court and get different kinds of orders where the state court judge says, listen, this person is essentially, it depends what kind of order, but that they're vulnerable, they've suffered a harm, it's not in their best interest to go back to their home country, and we're going to appoint the state or another person as their guardian. And with that, then you file this application with immigration that is not asylum, it's different than asylum, but it allows them a way to ultimately get their green card. We're really concerned about this group of youth because they're very, again, vulnerable and they need a lot of help, and they're unaccompanied, they're alone. And so it's something that if you encounter one of those people, one of those kids, do what you can to reach out to Northwest Immigrant Rights Project or refer them, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, Catholic Community Services, or another agency that deals with helping the kids, because there are programs. There's a program called KIND, actually I don't have it up here, Kids in Need of Defense, but they're in Seattle, they're fantastic. We can circulate their information, but they work with these kids, and they're a nonprofit, and they help them, and I don't know what their weight is like right now, but I think they're pretty accessible if you have a kid and you come across that's here without their parents.
They have limitations on what they'll
Yeah,
do, but the best thing, I wrote down this NERC.org because they will transfer you to who can help. Northwest Immigrant Rights Project is a great organization. They're also really good about what the current legal situation is. So if you read a story, you want to know if it's true or not. Maybe a day or two before it's up there, but they usually have something in their newsreel about what's happening and what's going on that you can depend on, because there's a lot of websites you can't. They're either outdated or the information isn't accurate. And they're really good that way. And of course, Skagit IRC ties into NERC and has stuff in there too. Locally. So I guess
NERC are the legal experts. We're just local advocates, so refer to NERC.
Yeah.
it's 3 o'clock. I'm trying to go.
We're going to do one. Does anyone have any questions at this point? We might look at doing our breakouts. I think we talked more about
Yes.
Sorry?
Okay, a notario is a notary public. So in Mexico, if you are a notario, you are always a lawyer. So the way it's set up in Mexico, it's like you're a regional lawyer, you got appointed, you're a lawyer, and you're like a higher lawyer. So in Mexico, when you come here and you see notario, people go, oh man, that's a lawyer, and they're a good one. In fact, they're not. It's a notary public. In Spanish, it's notario. So notary public, you have to, you have to be a citizen, and you have to have 2 citizens sign that you're an okay person, and then pay a fee, and lo and behold, you're a notario. So that doesn't make you an immigration specialist. You really need a lawyer to do it. It's just too complicated.
Or the BIA, the accredited reps can do Catholic Community
For
Services
people who are
different.
nonprofits,
Yeah.
have, like Northwest Immigrant Rights Project has attorneys, and they have accredited representatives, which is a person who's specially trained to assist people, but they need the supervision of an attorney. And we have 2 here in Skagit County that do that with Catholic Community Services, and they work in conjunction with attorneys that aren't here, but they work in conjunction. And they had to get licensed and take a test. So that's also a really valuable way to do it.
Okay, go ahead.
If you have citizen children who are over the age of 21, can they still sponsor you? Is that still a viable route?
Good question.
So well, let's just talk a little bit. Well, we're gonna do a session on family sponsorship. It's gonna be one of the options. So it sounds like that's something that we need to talk about. Yeah, I mean, in case you don't go to the family one, basically a U.S. citizen can sponsor parents. A U.S. citizen who's 21 can sponsor parents, children, married or unmarried, fiance, siblings, spouse.
Yeah.
And lawful permanent resident can sponsor a spouse, or they can sponsor unmarried children. And that's it for family.
And the 21-year-old, though, that question's a good one, and it's a big one because there's sort of 2 questions. They can sponsor their parent if they're 21 or older, but then the question moves on to, okay, so you have a 21-year-old daughter, and they can sponsor their parent's sponsor. They can file that first paperwork, which is called an I-130, a petition to say, hey, I want a visa to be available. But that person might not be eligible to actually complete what the rest of the process entails, and that depends on a million things in their history. And there's a lot of parents in that situation where they have a child that's 21 that wants to sponsor them, so they could do the first part, and they think, oh great, I've been waiting all these years, I'm ready to go. But because, for example, they entered it without permission, and they're not eligible to get the required waivers because there's not that many waivers available if it's just a child, they can't do anything. And again, if they try to go through the process, the daughter sponsors the mom, and then she gets this appointment, oh, you have to go to your consulate in Juarez, she's going to fly down there and find out at that point, well, yeah, but you needed a waiver because you entered illegally 20 years ago, and you don't get a waiver through a child, and then they're not allowed back in. So it's a complicated
So the answer is sometimes.
Sometimes. But if
Sometimes.
you've been here undocumented, your child, it might be very difficult for your child to sponsor you.
Yes, that's
It
very
could
true.
be. And even if you're documented, depending on what the situation,
Yeah.
even if you came in with a visa, it might be difficult. So but sometimes it works, right? So we're always looking for how do we make this work?
Yeah.
Sometimes they have a parent that can provide the hardship factor. So you have a grandparent so sometimes there's a waiver available because of that. Or sometimes somebody brought somebody in across the border in their arms, a child, and now they don't qualify for it because now they consider that smuggling. So you have to leave the country and apply for a pardon in the other country and wait for it. So there's a lot of complications.
But some waivers for an unlawful entry are only available if you have a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse or parent. So some of those cases when you just have the 21-year-old child won't allow you to get that waiver, and that is a common scenario. Did you have a question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I didn't hear the second part of that lawful permanent resident can sponsor a spouse and
Unmarried children.
Yes, can we have a quick update about DACA and what the future of it looks like?
So, yeah, let's
Answer
answer
his
let's
question.
answer
I know,
his question
I
first,
feel
'cause
like
I feel
we're
bad
not
we'll
to
come back to this.
Sorry about that.
It's totally fine. I don't know if you're covering it down the road, but are we going to discuss the validity of ICE warrants and since I'm an ESL teacher, I just want to know what happens if ICE ever showed up in my classroom, can I advise my students to leave and not talk to them? What power do I have?
So first of all, they're not supposed to come to schools. Churches, what?
Cheers.
Yeah, good.
They're not supposed to
Medical
come,
clinics, are they allowed to troll around those?
they're not supposed to go to hospitals, which I would include medical clinics in them. They're not supposed to go to churches, they're not supposed to go to schools.
Domestic
And-
violence shelters.
And one of the things, after Trump took over, he said, we're not following this executive order, we're not following this, we're not following this, but the one he left in was that, about the school.
Yeah.
So I would say, as a teacher, you would stand up and say, this is a school, you don't have permission to be here, you can't come in and talk to any of my students.
Yeah. And we haven't seen them.
Qualify if it's a class activity action, if it's not beneficial to the student?
We tend to work within schools.
Okay,
But that follows with the second question, what is the validity of an ICE warrant that's signed by an officer?
So you have to look at the warrants, so each ones are different, but technically, what we've been arguing is that unless it's signed by a judge, it's not effective. The warrants that are not signed by a judge, it's been upheld in different courts saying that you don't have to surrender yourself. But if immigration is coming for you and you put up a big fight and you have another form of relief or something else is going on, you might not be doing yourself any favor. Because it may be that they would let you go, it may be that you can say, well, I've got 3 kids at home and this and this and this, and you go, well, in your situation, you would be better off to work with them, to just tell them the situation. They'd probably let you go or send you a notice saying you got to go to court, but not take you. So it really varies from case to case. But in general, what we tell people is, we do know your rights presentations. And then the know your rights presentation, we tell them that you don't have to answer the door. We tell your kids, don't answer the door to a stranger, right? It's one of the basic, be safe. Don't get in a car with a stranger, don't open the door to a stranger. So if somebody comes and knocks at your door and it's immigration, you say, and they say, I'm here to talk to you, you say, show me the warrant. Well, I can slip it under the door or hold it up to the window, and you try and get them to do that. You don't open your door. I did have one client that opened their door but put their foot there, to hold it so they couldn't come in, and they shoved their way in, but they had also called 911 because they were like, why is this person trying to break into my house? And so the police showed up and immigration was there, and we got that case dismissed, even though the person had no papers. So you can win these sometimes, and that was a good situation where, we were successful in getting it to disappear. But it's not always in somebody's best interest to fight. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. Depends on what options they potentially have and what their situation is. Because when you ratchet it up with ICE, sometimes it's hard. But in a situation where you're teaching a class and they want to come in, I would absolutely stand up there. I would take them to the door and say, hey, you do not have my permission. I'm the teacher here. You don't have my permission to talk to anyone here. And tell the kids to sit down.
Yeah.
And I'd kick them out. Do your best.
And there is that safe place memo. I mean, it's very easily understandable, and it's publicly available on the ICE website. I mean, I can word a chapter, but they're supposed to follow that. That's like Carol said, still in effect. So you could have a copy and be like, follow your own rules, Like, I don't want to hear
But
that.
I think they're familiar with this. If you're in a school, they're going to back off,
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah.
What they have to have is sometimes you have to push them, right? Somebody has to stand up.
In the class and on school grounds?
It says at school.
Yeah, it should be.
Anywhere on the school grounds?
It just says school.
Parking lot?
So when it says school, to me, that's school grounds, typically. So what we were going to do is, and maybe you guys want to do this all in one group, but we were going to sort of talk about DACA in one scenario, but I'll give you a quick summary.
Should we do a survey about what people are interested in maybe? Because we were going to, I think remaining, we just have to use.
Yeah, some of you maybe, can I have a show of hands of people who are interested in learning about victims of crime and what you can do to help them?
That's for different benefits under violence against women and children, domestic violence, sexual assault, things like that, and then also trafficking victims.
Okay, so maybe on this tab, yeah. And then DACA, almost everybody, okay. And then learning about the Northwest Detention Center and deportation. Okay. And then family. Okay, so we're probably going to break, I think we should break into 2 groups and do, because we can't do all 4, there's just no way.
Say it till they come.
No, we won't. But I'm going to talk about DACA briefly for everybody, since
Yeah,
almost
a lot
everybody
of
was
people
asking about it.
Yeah.
So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So what it was set up for, what Obama had said was, I'm going to make it so that if you came here as a child, and you didn't have any serious criminal problems, that we're going to say you're a low priority of being deported. We're not going to deport you. We're not interested in deporting you. And we're going to give you what's called deferred action. Deferred meaning we're not doing anything. It's just sort of you're on the back burner. And he said, and anybody who wants to apply for a work permit, can apply for the work permit. So in this country, we've had deferred action forever. It's not new. It's like, oh, did President Obama invent it? No, he didn't. But what he did was he set up a way you could access it. And he set up a specific way to access it for certain groups. So anybody who's had deferred action ever has always been able to get work permit. So what he did is he said, okay, this is a group I'm not going to deport. I'm not going to deport people who came here under the age of 16, before 2007, who were continuously living in the United States and were here on June 15, 2012. Now, those little details aren't really important to write down anymore because it's no longer, it's gone. Trump ended it. What he did was he said the people who already have filed applications for DACA, we're going to process them. If you need to renew your application and it expires between October 5th of 2007, September 5th and October 5th, you could apply, or March 5th, you can reapply by October 5th.
Yeah.
All of these dates are done. So right now, DACA is a work permit that people have, and it's nothing else, because he took it away. It was something that Obama just said, I'm doing this, I'm making these low priority, and Trump said, well, I'm changing, I'm not doing it anymore, which he had the power to do. Most of us in this were happy, at least he waited a while. We thought he'd just, the first day, he'd just strip it. But there's going to be a lot of litigation about this, and there's a lot of pressure on Congress right now to pass a law. And I have a whole bunch of, I have a whole bunch of copies about which is American Immigration, well, we can just see it here. The American Immigration Lawyers Association put out a policy brief about protecting dreamers and what the different laws say that are pending in Congress, and I've got like 35 copies of it here. But American Immigration Lawyers is an association that we're members of, and any immigration lawyer that does it regularly is a member of, and if they aren't a member of this group, then they probably don't just do immigration law, or they don't do a lot of it, because it's such a great organization that advocates for immigrants, but also is a really good resource for us as a jury.
So, I mean, I think the good thing that we've felt is a huge community support locally, at least, and I think nationally, for these groups of individuals. I think a lot of people on both sides of the immigration debate, or maybe that don't agree on some issues, come together more on DACA. So I think, I don't know, I feel hopeful that there'll be some sort of resolution. And this is really informative because it does talk about, like Carol said, the different proposed.
The thing that's exciting about it is it's bigger than DACA. So
Yeah.
oftentimes includes more people than who got DACA. So it's not just the people who received DACA, who applied and received. There's a lot of people who are scared to file for it, never filed for it. It includes a lot of other folks too. So that's most of these bills too. So that's the best thing about it. The worst thing about some of them is that they restrict access to certain people who can't get it for one reason or another. And again, it's an earned thing, so they're requiring that somebody, most of these, you have to go to college, or you have to show that you have a job in a certain way, or you can join the military. So there's different ways that they want to see you're a productive member of society. Yeah, yeah, and there's most of the enforcement that's been done against DACA occurred in the news. There really hasn't been a lot going on in that so far. They're not going out to people whose cars expired.
targeting.
And there really isn't any, well, there are people who had filed, who didn't refile for one reason or another in a timely fashion. So before he made the announcement in September that he was ending it, people who had their card expired for up to 6 months could just refile. And so if you waited and you didn't refile during that 6 months, and you didn't have the $495 to pay the filing fee or some other reason, you were then out of luck. So there's a lot of folks who are in that situation.
And some people have other options, so they can pursue that, you know, and they are able to transfer from the program. And some luckily got the renewal one more time. They got in that window where it was expiring, you know, before March, and they applied before October. We did a lot of clinics and other people all statewide, and I think nationally did. And so they have the permit for a couple more years, but there's so much, I'm sure you guys know, upset and fear about what's going to happen when that ends. But I guess, as Carol said, you know, at least we haven't seen, ICE isn't saying, they're saying the contrary, they're not going to go and target people whose permits are expiring solely on that basis. But I feel like it is just, it's basically so, maybe that in the advocacy breakout, you guys Jim has great ideas about how you can make your voice heard, and we need comprehensive change on this issue because it's a huge number of people who came out of the shadows and are contributing members of our country. I think there's much more on that.
So let's break out. So what we're going to need to do is sort of separate the tables so we can have one sort of round here and one more round back there. You guys can help us organize that really quickly and help yourself some coffee or tea or whatever. And we can, what do you want to do? Frank, let's do it for
section, and I work a lot in those programs. Yes, so we'll be talking a lot about what's called the U visa. That's one of those programs. The T visa. So U visa is a visa that's available for certain victims of crime, and then the T visa is a visa that's available for victims of trafficking. It's called the T visa. And then I mentioned briefly some of the benefits for the unaccompanied minors that are coming here, special immigrant juveniles. We might talk a little bit about that as well. And then asylum. Asylum's a big topic, but I could share a little bit with you guys about that as well. Those are the humanitarian-based programs that I want to talk about. So I think we will start with the U visa because that's a really important program to be aware of. And what it is it's a way for people who have been the victim of a crime to, if they have cooperated with an investigation or prosecution of the crime, and if they can show they've suffered a substantial harm because of what they went through. There is an enumerated list of crimes, so it's not every crime, right? Typically, there's certain crimes they don't want people to they specifically don't want to include, you know, smaller things. If you're a victim of a small petty theft, they're going to say, no, that's not going to arrive.
Somebody tries to, your ex-husband strangled you.
Right. So the most common types of crimes that I work with or see in this program are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, rape. It's just unfortunately really prevalent. And we have someone from DVSAS, and I need to meet you because I used to work with Elizabeth, and I know that you're a little new there. So I love your agency, and I refer everybody to Skagit Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Services here in Skagit are doing such great work as really the advocates behind this crisis that we have. So yeah, that is the type of crime when you said if your ex-husband tries to strangle you. Yeah, there is that requirement though, so that the crime happened in the U.S. and also that they have cooperated in an investigation or prosecution. And there are, in order to even be able to ask for the visa, you have to first get what's called a certification, which is this form that Department of Homeland Security has created, and it has to be signed by whoever prosecuted or investigated or detected the criminal activity. So that's typically the police, right, a law enforcement officer, a judge. If a judge detected domestic violence in the proceedings before he or she, then they can sign it. There's also
law enforcement, like CPS can certify, Department of Labor can certify, the EEOC, I can never remember the proper thing for them, but in an employment-based context can also certify as well. We typically work with local law enforcement, Mount Vernon Police Department, the Skagit County Sheriff, the city prosecutor, and also the county prosecutor's office. Every agency is completely different to work with on these. We've done a lot of outreach many years ago when we started. The program really started in '07 roughly when the final rules came out. And there was a lot of pushback where, you know, certifying officers were saying, wait, I don't want to give this person a visa. I don't want to grant them, and it's like, you don't have the power to do that, even if you wanted to, and that's not what we're asking you to do. So there was a lot of education. Look, we're asking you to sign this form to confirm a couple of questions, basically, that she was the victim in this case and that she was cooperative. And the standard for them to deny and to show cooperation is that they have unreasonably refused to provide assistance. So even some cases where they say, yeah, well, she gave us 3 statements, we took her photo, and then she, you know, participated in the hearing, but there was that one time, you know, I had a client that did cooperate, and then they tried to follow up with her and they couldn't reach her. Well, but then the question is why? Why couldn't you reach her? Well, she had packed up all of her stuff and fled with her 5 children from Arizona and drove up here because she was in that much danger. I mean, he was going to, yeah, she would be killed by her abuser. And so we presented that saying, look, this is, yes, she failed to ultimately give you what you wanted at that very last stage, but she did cooperate, and her failure later was not unreasonable. And they agreed. They said, you know, so a lot of what we do is provide that information and bridge that communication barrier too. But you have to get the certification. And I think locally our agencies are really actually quite great now. Overall, as far as understanding the program, we have invited them to trainings by USCIS and they went. And now it's always changing because you get a new lieutenant and you get a new person who's in charge. So it's not, I think, a problem that we won't encounter more in the future where we need to re-educate. But locally, I'm really appreciative of our law enforcement community is understanding the program and being willing to certify in cases that deserve it. So I'm just very happy we're here at that point. Basically, once you get the certification, you can then make your application with immigration. I told you guys earlier there's that benefit granting branch, which is USCIS, and they have little offices everywhere anyway. So the application goes to their office. It's a great program, and I'm going to tell you why it's great and then why it's difficult. It's great because all the barriers we were talking about before with people who have gone in and out and entered in certain ways, almost all of those barriers can be waived, so you can ask for forgiveness, basically. And that's unusual. In a lot of programs, like we said, you may be married to a U.S. citizen, but if you've gone in and out and lived here for more than 1 year in between after 97, it's like a 10-year bar is put on your case. You have to live outside for 10 years. Whereas with the
crime victims, it's really difficult.
The waiver is huge. It's broad, it's generous, and it's, yeah, we are of course seeing that tighten up now too, but you can ask for a waiver of all of those grounds. So it's a door that's open to a lot of people who otherwise, I do visas for people who are married to U.S. citizens or have 21-year-old children, and they can't benefit through that family member because of all the things we talked about earlier. They just don't have the waiver, they don't qualify, but they can do the U visa. So it's great for that. It's great because we have historically not seen any risk associated with the program. So if you apply and they decide you don't qualify, they don't take action to try to then remove you from the country. It's a denial and you're let be. And they have continued to reaffirm since Trump was elected that they're gonna proceed with that. They're not going to then enforce. So the risk is low. There's no appointment before an immigration judge. There's no appointment with an immigration officer. It's all done via paper, which is great. The really hard thing about the U visas is that there's this backlog that has grown. So Congress said we have 10,000 a year that they can work with. the program has become more and more well-known. The need is huge, and they aren't increasing the cap, and so what you have is this gigantic wait list where we're looking at right now when we file the application. It's 3 years to even get the initial review done, which is when you get your first work permit.
I think I got in when I was helping a client, it was 2008.
And those are the golden days.
Yeah,
they were great. Yeah, it was 6 months and you had it, yeah. And now what happens is 3 years, you get that first work permit, then you're put on another wait list, and long story short, you're looking at another 8 years or something before you're through it. But it is a path to get your permanent residency. You get these work permits and visa, the U visa itself, and then ultimately can apply for your permanent residency. So it is a path that is slow, but it's one that is still good. I just wish it was a lot bigger. We have, and again, the program was created with this dual intent in mind, where Congress said, look, we have this huge problem. These immigrants are coming here. We have these immigrant populations. They're being abused, they're being victimized, and they're being taken advantage of in all kinds of scenarios, not just domestic violence. I mean, workplace, right? Employers are abusing them and subjecting them to unlawful conditions, and they're too scared to report. So law enforcement can't do their job because there's so much fear, and this was happening back in the day where when the police would come, you knew that they were going to call Border Patrol to interpret locally, or just refer over to ICE. And so basically people knew, well, if I call and report that I am being beaten up, or if I call and report that I've been abused, then I'm going to get detained by immigration. And so it was preventing them. And they recognized that it's such a big problem. We need this dual intent program. And it's just a shame they won't give us more than 10,000. But it's still a great program. If people are in immigration court and they are eligible for this, there's ways that we can help get their court closed and have this right for them to apply for the U visa. I'm going to pass this. This is actually from USCIS, and it should have been a little flyer, and I didn't have time to fold it properly. Sorry, but it does talk a little bit about this program, if you want one, and I think it's a great little summary that they've done that really is, saying, hey, these are the purposes of the program and what people are doing. They also put out great materials. They do trainings for certifying agencies that have questions, and help educate. So they actually have some good outreach within USCIS. They have an office in Washington, D.C., and that's their job. And I've worked with them where locally we had some people in the police department, and they just didn't feel comfortable signing, and I understood why, because they just felt like, what am I doing? Am I vouching for this person's character? Is this going to come back to bite me? And we had them talk directly with people from DC, and they'll often feel a lot better having heard it from immigration than me, who I clearly have a job that I'm trying to do for my client. So the U visa, again, is a great program. It's not only, I want to emphasize, we do see a rise in the domestic violence, sexual assault arena, but it is not only for those kinds of crimes. Actually, the crimes are listed on that pamphlet, I believe, if you're curious. And there's also some wiggle room where you can be creative and say, look, it wasn't one of those crimes, but it was very similar, and we can do it. But yeah.
So if this is victims of a crime, what if they're witnesses?
Yes, good question. So within the definition of what is a victim under the program, some witnesses can qualify as a victim. So for example, there are always horrible cases when I give the case examples because the facts are always so tragic, but so I can give you a less depressing one maybe. Well, one example would be, and actually they had proposed this as an example when they were writing the rules, that a pregnant woman had witnessed a murder. And because of that, she actually, had a miscarriage. And they said, look, that's a situation where that person is going to be deemed a victim. Like, she wasn't the direct victim. The person next to her who was shot was the direct victim. But she was so impacted that as long as she was helpful and she can show that she has suffered this harm and gets the certification, she's going to be considered a victim. We've had children in really sad cases who have witnessed really terrible things happen to their parents. And they were not essentially the direct victim of the assault or whatever, but they witnessed it and they're a child, and that was so traumatic. And they grant those. They're more narrowly. It's not anyone. So if it's a witness of, it just depends, right? If you have to show that they were really directly impacted. So if you had someone that, witnessed somebody else steal a book from a store, all of that, it's going to be a sliding scale where they'll say no, right? It has to be pretty.
For the purpose of they're getting legal status, not
Yeah.
necessarily being protected from deportation. So if they go and talk to the police, the police knock on the door, did you see such and such, cars were broken into, blah, blah, blah. And if they talk to those people, if they talk to the cops, that's not protected under this. Like just to basically make a report of something
Right.
happening in the neighborhood.
Right. So I know locally, so yes, I mean, the U visa, to be able to apply for the U visa, yeah, you would have to be considered a victim, so a witness that suffered a real harm. But to answer your question, right, if somebody was saying, look, there were some cars broken into and the police want to come and talk to them, that's probably not going to be sufficient for the U visa. But I know locally, and Jim knows a lot about this too.
I understand, but can the cops at that point, can they safely be a witness?
Yes, they should be locally. And if you've heard of a report of them not safely being a witness, we want to know about it, because that was a problem back in the day, and that is not what's happening. Are you in Skagit Valley here? Yeah. Yes, they safely, you haven't heard anything different on that, right? They safely should be a witness. People reporting to the police, we have not had them enforcing, calling immigration enforcement if they're reporting a crime at all, and that has stopped, and I haven't heard.
Local and county police
Yeah.
will not.
And there's been no change in that I know of. I think we would have heard. Yeah. It's a great question. Yeah. I knew that, yeah. 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 There's a huge number of reasons. Most of the people we work with have left because of some kind of hardship, and it may be poverty in their family, extreme poverty, and sometimes it's violence in different, land conflict or just, discrimination against their indigenous community or other. But a lot of people also are fleeing domestic violence. And a couple of years ago, we had a great new couple of decisions that came out in immigration courts that said that we are finally recognizing. It was happening before. We were making the arguments and the cases were prevailing, but they finally came out and we have a decision that was precedent that said, look, we recognize that in some of these cases, what's happening to these women and children rises to the level of persecution for purposes of asylum, which was really a wonderful thing, because it certainly does, if you've worked with these people who have been through some of that, and what you have to show for asylum is totally different, right? This isn't for cases where the harm has occurred here. You have to basically show that you have been persecuted, which is a very high level of harm on account of what Carol mentioned, those 5 grounds. And now we have that recognition, and it was happening earlier, but it was a harder fight, that gender-based violence can be considered a social group. That if you are, the case that came out said, look, this married woman in Guatemala who is unable to leave her relationship, basically that qualifies. So we use it and change it from women from different places and children and things. But basically, if you're in a family relationship and you can't leave because, and a lot of what goes on, the other thing you have to show is that the government is unwilling or unable to protect you, and that's the truth. In many countries, you're suffering from this horrible persecution, and the government cannot or will not help you. And what we have in a lot of the countries I work with throughout Central America and Mexico are very strong cultural norms, beliefs that are deep-rooted that basically normalize that behavior, and the police are as conditioned, and the courts. So you basically, you go and report to the police and they just look the other way. Nothing happens. And women are being killed. Children are being killed. It's happening, and it's horrible. And so I'm really happy and proud that the courts here recognize and the agencies recognize that in some cases that there's a humanitarian benefit that you can apply for, and it kind of stems out of international law and the fact that, and I know that sometimes we talk about immigration and it's like you have to make the pitch that immigrants are contributing because they are, and here's all the things they're doing in the workforce, because it's true. But sometimes I want to say, come on, it's also like sometimes the right thing to do to help people who are just born into these horrible situations, and just the whole give me you're tired and you're poor, and have an open heart that some people, they need a new chance. And my asylum clients that we work with are contributing and work really hard, and the minute they have a work permit, and sometimes before, usually before, they're working really hard to support their kids, and they're stronger than I think I would be in that situation. I mean, it's really amazing, but also that there is this high level of compassion, at least I have that, because you have to ask yourself, well, what would you do if you were born into that circumstance? Or you're that kid that is, orphaned and being targeted and harmed, so it's sad to see this administration trying to target and enforce against that population more. But again, we do have some of these good things, like I said, this decision and these laws around domestic violence that are allowing us to do these cases before the immigration courts. And so some women, and other agencies, so some women, again, if they've come here and the story is that they had this horrible history in their home country, they can also apply for asylum. There's a bunch of requirements about when you can do it, and you have to usually do it within 1 year of coming here. So you have to do it quicker. It's hard to do it if this happened 20 years ago or something. But again, there's still options. So I guess the message again being, if that's what their struggle is, that they should know that so many people are, I work with say, I just wish I knew that a few years ago, and it's hard to know because they don't publicize these programs as much, I think. They're just not as well known yet. So I think the final thing I wanted to touch on is the T visa, which is a visa that's available for victims of trafficking. So trafficking has certain definitions under the law, and typically we deal with either sex trafficking or labor trafficking, and you have to show that you have been the victim of one of these forms of trafficking as defined by the federal law, that you're here on account of the trafficking. You have to comply with requests from law enforcement, but you don't need the certification. So it's a little interesting. Like the last one that I did.
You gotta not run from them when they come.
Right, and you have to make typically what we've done is, made this good faith effort to report it and to the authorities that federally investigate that. And if they want to ask questions, you need to cooperate. But if it's something that happened many years ago, they often won't. It says, well, we really can't do anything at that point, but we'll have the paper trail of them offering the information, and that is good enough for immigration. So it's a much more flexible requirement. You don't have to have the signature that says, yes, you cooperated, the way that you do for the U visa. The great thing about the T visa is that there's 5,000 only a year, but it's never been met, the cap. It's one of those, and I think last year it was only a couple thousand that were issued. It's really not utilized. And I think it's also one of those things where, because it's not as well known, or who knows, what the reason is. But it's another option that, and unfortunately this is happening, right, where there's different scenarios. I mean, we've done cases for people that were labor trafficked. I have a client who was from China, and he was, told that we're going to give you this, there's a whole operation, right, of smugglers that say, look, if you give me all this money, I can get you this better life, this better job. They go to these fishing villages and they recruit people and say, you can go to America, and the minute that they're under their control, they're subjected to horrible conditions. They're brought over on these really horrible trips on the boats, and they're forced to work in restaurants long hours of the day, and that's kind of what a lot of the labor trafficking ones look like. Although there's also cases where people come here and get subjected to domestic servitude, where they're domestic servants basically in these homes, and those also are cases that can manifest as a T visa. And then we've seen them also from, again, similar case that comes to mind, but where she was from Thailand, and same thing, here's a visitor visa, I'm going to promise you a job and all of these things, and ultimately they just then get you under the control the minute you're here. It's like, you owe me $40,000 for the trip over, and here's how you're going to pay it off, and then you're just stuck in this ring of ugliness that is all over the country. And so those happen, but it's not just, again, I think, I don't know how we see those, but they're not as common as the situation with the U visa. I think the big red flags are when people are, like I said, if you know of anyone that ends up being subjected to the domestic servitude situations where they're being made to work, forced to work in the home, or even in a small business, that's a red flag, right? Where they can sometimes, even if they weren't initially coming here. I think people think trafficking and they think that, okay, well, the worker was taken and smuggled in that way, but sometimes people may have come a different way and ended up in a situation that's considered trafficking, like a forced labor situation.
Find a boyfriend who
And then all of a
cares for them,
sudden,
and
right.
suddenly they're slaves.
And suddenly they're here, and being here on account of the trafficking, so that there's wiggle room with what that means. It doesn't mean that necessarily the second they step foot here, they were in the trafficking ring or whatever. Yeah, sometimes it happened later. So it is something we see, and the form has some information about it. And again, I think the takeaway is just that there are these humanitarian programs. They're very different than what we hear about in the news and the mainstream cases, family-based applications and things like that. The rules are different. Typically, the waivers are greater. I mean, more forgiving. I think they're greater. But that I think we've come a long way locally to where I can comfortably say that people should feel safe coming out to report what's going on. And unfortunately, it's still a huge problem. We do have cases all the time where people are very afraid of coming forward. So to the extent you can encourage that, I think if some people know that, oh, there's resources, and I mean, I don't know if you want to say a word or two, but Skagit, again, Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Services does so much advocacy in the community, right? So I know that if you, for the rest of us who are here at least, and even, but you have branches all over. So, I mean, I always think if you don't know what to do and you encounter someone who's in that situation, send them over their way because they know what to do. And Bridget Collins, I know locally too, working with children, does amazing work, and most of you probably are aware of that organization too. But just knowing that these agencies serve regardless of your immigration status, they're going to help you. And I think it's always, the more people that know about these issues and that they're happening, the more of us can send people the right way, the right places. I mean, I know or if you're here locally and ever think you have someone who might be in a situation, then you can always contact us or them as well, because I think those cases, most people are happy to try to help,
Yes. We're always there for anyone. They don't even have to give their names to us. They're serving them.
Skagit Domestic Violence used to do a radio program at KFBR. Do you still have that going?
Yes, I'm starting that. Yes. So, but except now that I started it, now I'm giving more information because, of course, there's a lot of information about domestic violence. But now we've seen like 3 different communities here in Skagit County. So it's like the indigenous and also the Hispanic community and the Ukraine community. So those are my targets right now. And so I do speak Mixteco.
Oh, that's great. Yay.
So that's why the radio is in Mixteco now and in Spanish. So I'm just looking for another person that speaks Ukraine so that we can have it in all 3 languages to help out.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that. That's great.
Are there shelters for the women? So what if they make a call and they're in a crisis? Is there a place for them to go?
That's a great, you answer that question. Yeah, she's going to know.
So we're all cross-trained, meaning that we have like over 42 hours, all of us. So we do it's called pre-screening, where we get the call, we talk to the person who's in crisis, and then we ask certain questions and see if we approve it, it goes to a shelter advocate, and then they process it that way. So, but it's usually a fast response that we give them.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Because we can,
Yeah, I've got a question. You said for the T visa, even if it happened years ago, does that mean that?
That's a good question, yeah.
Because the other one was within a year. So now this happened years ago.
Yeah, so the asylum, typically to apply for asylum, you have to apply within 1 year of arriving. There are exceptions to that. If something materially significant changed in your home country that then made it impossible for you to return, you can apply sometimes within 1 year of that date, etc. And if you're a minor, there's exceptions. But typically, that 1 year is a problem. But for these other programs, there is no time limit. So we have U-Visa clients that come in, and I have done several where the crime occurred in the late 90s, What can be challenging is getting the report and then getting law enforcement to sign off on it, because either the report isn't there or they don't recall. I mean, that gets tricky. But if you can get the certification, and certainly with the T's as well, you know, the two that I can think of right now that I have that they didn't come to me and didn't know about it. They had no idea. I mean, they were just also so stuck in this part of the whole approach is isolation and really cutting off the access to any kind of outside of the labor ring or the sex trafficking ring. So anyway, there's a real lack of information. So a lot of people don't know or don't find it upon themselves to have the information till years later, and that's fine. As far as there's no bar, which is a really nice thing. Yeah. So when we screen people, we always try to really talk about, we ask the question, like, have you ever been a victim of a crime, have you ever mistreated, have these things happened in any year, you know, and have you ever seen something bad happen to somebody close to you? And because again, what you were asking earlier, there are these different definitions of a victim. And another exception, for example, will be what we call an indirect victim. So we talked about how you could be a witness, and sometimes that can make you a victim for purposes of the program. But if you are, for example, a minor child, and you're the parent of a minor child, and something very traumatic happens to that minor child, they will consider you a victim. It's under a different kind of victim, an indirect victim, because they impute the harm to the parent, which I think is right, because if you have something horrible happen to your child, that is often very commonly going to inflict a lot of suffering on the parent. So there are certain, and if likewise, if you're a sometimes if there's incompetence or deceased, someone is deceased, there can be somebody who is then an indirect victim of that situation. But typically we see it in cases where something happens to a minor child. And when the crime happened to them, they were under 21, then their parent can be considered a victim of that crime. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about access to lawyers.
Yeah.
You can't do everything pro bono.
Yeah.
And I know there are agencies that have lawyers, but really, what is the access, do you think?
Yeah, locally? So this is a great question, because it is a issue up north, I feel. In Seattle we have NERP and they're great, but for a U visa there's a couple-year wait list. U visas are really my soft spot, so we do take a lot of them, and we'll always take referrals from your agency to work with people to do them on a low bono or pro bono basis. But it's difficult because are you talking access generally or for U visas for these benefits?
I think I was talking generally.
Generally, yeah. So because again, we talked about the accredited reps. They're wonderful, but they don't do court. They can't do the U visas, the T visas. So there's a lot of limitations. They do family-based. They help with DACA and citizenship, and they're Catholic Community Services here. They're fantastic, but only for certain kinds of applications. There's just not a lot of immigration attorneys north of Seattle, to be totally honest. I can count us and two others who are great here, and then we have a couple in Bellingham. Majority of the Bellingham ones do business and family, and there are a couple that are doing the removal. So when you look at our geographic region and the need, it's really hard because there isn't enough. And Carol and I talk all the time. It's like one of our goals is to get a nonprofit together at the same time to really try to increase the capacity because there's a need. We're doing things right now like working with Western. I've just started working with a program up at Western, their Law and Diversity Center, to work with interns to do a little bit of a clinic where they get credit, and so it's to their benefit. But they also can help. Bilingual students can help with some of the preparation so that it can help us to do more and more of the pro bono. We're doing that for the U visas. And creative ways like that, but long term, there is a need to expand because there's not a lot of us up here, but there are, and I think Jim has a list. There are a few other good ones.
Website, Skagit Immigrant Rights Council. It's up there. It's the second one up there. You'll find a list of immigration attorneys.
Yeah.
You can download it.
Yeah, because there's probably, I shouldn't say because there's probably 4, 5, 6.
There's about 4 here.
Yeah.
And then I think there's 2 in Bellingham.
Yeah, that are doing that. Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
How costly is that?
Which?
If somebody, I mean, what do you guys charge somebody who comes to your?
Oh yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to talk about that in this setting, but I can tell you, I was told I'm not allowed to talk about business to promote business on the educational forums because we're volunteers, so we're not allowed to promote our business in any way. But I mean, I can tell you that a lot of us, how we work with these cases is, and I think most of the immigration attorneys on the list with that, I'm not sure, but that we'll just work out, you know, this is a case that's going to take 6 years, so we work with clients to really say, what's your situation? And we do very low payment plans, and that can make it accessible for people where they can pay a little bit every month. And like I said, with the U visas, we do a lot of those low bono or pro bono because it's just really hard to turn those away. But yeah, it's I also have no idea what other lawyers charge because we're not allowed to talk about that either amongst ourselves. It's a contrary to the rules. But I think, and my impression is, and I can say that there are payment for these types of cases. I think most of the attorneys that are doing this up north here are pretty reasonable on saying, look, you know, we're going to be doing this for so many years, so we can spread this out to make it a very affordable installment for them, just like a small bill. Yeah, it's a good question.
It seems like a silly question, but you know,
it's not. It's
I had to work with an attorney, and that was pretty shocking.
Yeah,
you know?
The reality. No, and the nice thing about the U visa program is that actually, so for most things you want to apply for under immigration, they will charge fees. So like if you want to apply for your green card through marriage or through a family member, just the fee to process the green card is $12.25 now, and that went up in December. Yeah, and then so if you're doing a packet through marriage, where you're one of those lucky few who can do a whole process and go to an interview here. You don't have to go to your consulate in your home country. The fees that have to go in that packet are about $535, so about $1,700 right now, and that's just for that. So the nice thing about the U visa, because they are so high, just the government fees, is there is no fee to apply for the U visa, no fee to apply for asylum. There is a fee technically for the waiver that most people need when they do a U visa or a T visa, but this office that deals with them over in Vermont that does, there's only one, now 2 offices that do these U visas. They have a unit that they have trained very specifically to adjudicate these matters because they're very unusual. Anyway, they waive the fees. I think I've never had to pay the fees on one of them because we do a short declaration basically setting forth the situation and say we want a waiver of that waiver fee. we want you to excuse the fees, and they do always, because they've said, look, it's not our purpose to profit, you know, and charge the fees. We're really, truly trying to further the goals of this humanitarian program, which is to help people get relief that deserve it. So that's another great thing, is that if you get an attorney that's willing to do it on a payment scheme that makes it doable, there are no fees for the immigration portion, and that's a huge deal as far as access, because even with DACA, we know that people had to pay that $495, and for some people that's why they couldn't do it. So there's a really generous fee. Again, this is why U visas are my favorite program, because there's so many ways that we can do things to make it accessible for people where you can't in another context through family or something like that.
You're certainly breaking the stereotype of lawyers.
Oh, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I know. Horrible lawyers. Oh my gosh, we try. Yeah, well, I know, and I was like, as a side note, but I did a little project. So if any of you are interested, just contact me after. I shouldn't make, but I don't, this is not a for-profit plug, so I'm allowed to mention it, but that I do a project for a lot of the women that we do the asylum cases for who've come here recently. They haven't had the chance yet to be able to start working. I mean, they're relocating and they don't have people here, and they're in really hard situations. And so we've started a little thing where it's just kind of word of mouth, but if you're ever interested in helping spread that, usually we do it more in the winter, but we basically get donations from local families. I live in Bellingham, so I do it up with the families up there, and we basically help 2 or 3 families at a time to gather things that they need, and we do different things. Like a lot of them are like the warm jackets that so many of us have in the Pacific Northwest, those puffy ones that are really expensive, that people are going and working in the fields, and they need warm blankets, and they need warm jackets, and they need gifts for their kids around Christmas, and they need good shoes. And so we do a drive, and it's just really great because it helps people when they're getting on their feet. before they can get that. Because even with asylum, if you apply, you can't work for a series of usually at least 6 months or so, and that's a really hard time. And so there's been a lot of great support from people just getting rid of things they don't need, and then we just redistribute it. But I don't know if you guys, and I'm not sure, we went to the break because I just realized, I think we were going to talk about family as well in this session, or did you guys have an interest, were you folks also the ones that were interested in hearing about the family-based immigration? Or, yeah, because I don't know if you have a watch, anybody, but
5 more minutes.
oh my goodness, so we're out of time. Because I was looking here going, wait, I think I was supposed to touch on that, but we were going to do 2 breakouts. I mean, I can go over it quickly and then pass what I brought out, just because it's also very frequently asked. But so with the family categories, like I said, totally different set of rules. You know, some of them are stricter, where you have, again, depending on the entries, when you entered, where you entered, how many times. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people that come in, and I've seen so many times that scenario where you have a 21-year-old daughter or son, you want them to be able to sponsor you, but because you entered unlawfully once in your past. Now, some people can do it because they entered with a visa, or they qualify for a waiver because they also have a LPR husband, or they have another exception, which is under 245I, it's called, where someone filed application for them before April of 2001, and there's a special program for them. But the majority, a lot of people don't have those 3 things, and they come in, and unfortunately, they can't complete the process. So one of the things we always emphasize is there's 2 questions, kind of 2 parts. One is, do you have a qualifying family member that can petition for you? But then there's like that second question of, okay, and is the person that is asking for the green card, are they actually eligible under this whole other separate section of, like, it's a laundry list of things, how many times have you entered? Have you ever lied to the government? Have you ever helped somebody else? Have you brought your own child here? Like Carol said, they'll allege that you're a smuggler. Have you committed a crime that's on this list of crimes? Have you ever, on and on and on. And for some of these issues, there are certain waivers. You can ask for forgiveness. But for some people, like we were saying, there's that 10-year punishment, or there's just no waiver available because you don't. So it's more complicated than just making sure you have the family tie, but that's certainly the first place. So I brought the visa bulletin. It's kind of dry, boring reading. If you can't sleep tonight, you can look at it, but it's just 3 pages. And what it has here is this chart, so I'll pass it around because I think it's useful. It kind of outlines the categories for family-based immigration. And so we have immediate relatives, and there's no limit on the immediate relatives. So if you're married to a U.S. citizen, they're considered an immediate relative. So for that first question of whether or not there's a visa available for you, for an immediate relatives, there's no cap on them. Also, if you are a U.S. citizen and you have a child that's under 21, same thing. If you're over 21 and you want to sponsor your parent, same situation. But then you get into these other categories of family that are not in the immediate relative category, and they're subject to caps. So what happens is we get these long wait lists, right? And every month the Department of State puts this out and says, hey, here's the wait list for these categories. And it's interesting because, so for the first category is an F1, I guess I'll pass it around, but, and those are unmarried sons and daughters. So a son and a daughter in immigration law is different than a child. A son or a daughter is over 21, a child is under 21. So if you have an unmarried son and daughter and you are a US citizen, then you're in this first preference category. Because if you're a U.S. citizen and you have a child that's under 21, there's no cap. But if you're over 21, there's a cap, and so there's a very long wait list. And then you have spouses and children of permanent residents. So if you're a green card holder, you can sponsor your children who are unmarried and your spouses. And then there's also another category for married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. It's a different thing. And then finally, there's a category for brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. And so what I always like to point people to is the chart at the bottom. It has the abbreviations. I mean, you could probably follow along, but if you look at, for example, F4, which is brothers and sisters, and you have to figure out what country you're looking at, but we very frequently deal with Mexico. So look down there. That means that today, in this month of November coming up, they'll be giving visas to people. They'll say that your visa is available for people who filed in 1997. That's a 20-year wait list. So people come in and say, well, can my brother sponsor me? Well, yes, they could try to file that first petition that we talked about, but it's often going to be a 20-year wait list. And then in addition, we have to say, well, plus when that's available, well, we don't know what the laws are going to say in 20 years, but we also have to say, look, there's that second question. Remember, this is just the first part. You're petitioning saying, I have the family tie. Then you're waiting 20 years for the number to be available. At that point, you still have to make sure you're eligible for that whole second part, and that's the part where you have the big list of things that they say, if any of these things apply to you, you're not admissible, you can't get it unless you have a waiver that you can get. And some people can get the waivers and some can't, right? So it's not very easy. When people say, get to the back of the line, this is the line they're talking about. I'm like, sometimes there really is no line, or there's a line, and then even if you wait through the line, at the end of the day, you're not going to be eligible for what you've asked for. If you look at, I mean, it's not as bad in all categories. So F2A and F2B, those are for lawful permanent resident spouses and children. And, you know, well, F2A, I should say, sorry, is November 2015. So that's about, you know, if you're a green card holder and you have a child under 21 or a spouse, you know, you can help them. It takes a couple years, but a 2-year wait list on this list is not a terrible wait. It's not as fast as if you are an immediate relative. So a lot of people will come in, and if they are able to become a citizen, they might do that in order to help their husband or wife quicker. But it's still, some people can't naturalize, they can't learn English, or they can't pass the test for some reason, and so they'll file under F2A, which is that category for a spouse of a green card holder. And again, that's the first part of the question. As long as their spouse is also eligible under all these other things, they can sometimes do stuff. And then the other categories for married sons and daughters and unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. Citizens are over 20 years as well, from Mexico. And so other countries are not as bad. The Philippines is also very backlogged in a lot of categories. So every month this comes out and basically says, okay, these are the numbers. Some months they don't move. So you're feeling really discouraged if you're on the wait list, because a month comes out and it's like they're still processing for that same month, and sometimes it does move forward, but it's very, very, very slow. And again, I think it's complicated like all of it, but the big big I think takeaway with that, again, with the family programs, people think that it's sort of this automatic thing. If you have the tie, you can get the benefit, and that's not the case. If you have the tie, right, it's just the first step. You have to go, I have the tie. Is there a visa current? Well, for spouses of U.S. citizens and minor children or parents of children who are over 21, they can get that first part answered pretty quickly. But for the rest of them, they have to go to this chart and figure out, well, where am I? And then you have to ask that second question. Okay, once I have this available number, can I actually get my residency? And then if so, how? Some people can do it here, and a lot of people have to go because of that list I keep telling you about. That's this big thing of these are all the problems that you could have, right? They have to get the final residency granted, they have to go back to their home country, apply for waivers, and
Do they all have to wait 10 years? Or?
No. So we, obviously, if someone comes to us, we screen them and make sure, you know, I won't send...
sending anybody out.
No, and there is a program that started when Obama was president that made it a lot better for a lot of these cases where, so no, we won't send people out that have to wait the 10 years. I mean, the odd person's wanted to, but very rarely do they. So typically people will go on another program which allows them to do waivers and applications here, and they just leave for about 1 or 2 weeks to do the visa processing in their country, and then they're back and they get their residency. So it's a pretty quick trip outside, but not 10 years, yeah.
What happens if a citizen apply for daughters or sons older than 21,
Yep.
single,
Yep.
but in the process of time, 10 years, the son or daughter get married and
they bump to the other category. So if they were unmarried and they were F1, what will happen is if they get married, they bump down to F3. The thing is, it doesn't make much of a difference because F3 and F1 are 96 and 95. They're almost as bad as each other. It's like 21 and 22 years. I'm like, eh. But so
But it's not from Mexico. Different. The first.
The first category, same thing. They would just change. Oh, so yeah, they would change categories.
5 years of difference.
Yes.
Then
So,
you wait 5 years.
yeah, typically, yeah.
Better to apply like married from the first infant.
From
They're not married.
No. For example, the person is deciding if get married or not.
Yes. Yes.
To put the application.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes, for them, it would be much better not to just do the religious ceremony or do an informal one. You're saying that they're deciding whether they should get married or not before filing this, and they're from an other category, which means that, yeah, between F1 and F4, or F1 and F3, sorry, there is like a 6-year difference there. So yeah, it would be in their best interest to not get married probably, because it's going to add on so many years to their processing time. And for people who are, sons or daughters of permanent residents, they can't get married. If they get married, they lose all of it, because you have to be unmarried to qualify. If the sponsor's a green card holder. But for your question, it was a citizen applying for their 21, son or daughter, and that son or daughter is trying to decide if they get married they're from one of these countries, then yes, they would probably not want to get married, because it's going to be a lot faster in the top category.
Two singles.
Yes.
Yes.
The day, 7 years, right? The day for the son or daughter are right here to put the case on the table. But now this person is married, is no single, like the application says.
Then it's done. If they got married, they're going to get bumped into that category. So they keep the same date, the priority date. So if they filed the application in 2010, and they're in F1 category, they're not married, and then they get married 4 years later, they're going to get bumped into the married category, but they still keep that 2010 date.
It's better.
Well, it's better than having to start all the way over, but it probably isn't better than if they had not gotten married. But if it's done, is done. If they got married, you don't want to lie about, that is what it is. But at least they can. Yeah, right. I'm like, that doesn't work.
If they're undocumented here, this doesn't apply to them at all, right?
Well, these categories, not necessarily, because so we have a lot of people that come in and they're like, I've lived here documented my whole life. I am undocumented, but now I'm married to a U.S. citizen. Depending on their facts, we can often then start this process for them.
But undocumented people, if they're not married to a citizen, they cannot go through this process.
Oh, right. If you're not either, like, you have to have one of these ties. So if you're undocumented and your parent is a LPR, or a citizen, or you're married, but this is all for family categories. So it's for people, exactly, undocumented or not, it's for people who have a family tie that qualifies, and the family ties are here. So it basically has to be, a sibling who's a U.S. citizen, a spouse who's a lawful permanent resident or a citizen, or if you're 21, you can do it for your parents, that kind of thing. Yeah. But it's if you have no family ties, then this doesn't apply. Yeah. There is a separate part of this that goes into the employment-based visas, but that was too much for today. And it's and in practicality, just a lot of the people we work with, like I said, don't qualify for work employment-based, because you can't have broken the immigration laws and had these issues of, whereas in the family programs, there's forgiveness and waivers you can get. Yeah, depending on your tie.
One last question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Crime victims that is undocumented families has access to apply for driver's license or ID.
Yep. I've heard that Mount Vernon, where's Jim? She knows a lot about this, but you should ask her. But the Mount Vernon Department of Licensing here office has been at times difficult to deal with on that issue, is my understanding. I don't work directly with them, but I have on a several issue. So, but the bottom line is, yes, I mean, my clients all have their driver's license and they're able to do it. I think there's the odd worker still there, though, that will turn them away and say you can't get it or whatever. And because they're on the DOL website, there are documents that say, look, if you don't have a valid social, here's what you can provide in lieu of that. And they're supposed to honor that. But they're just, to me, it seems like there's the odd person that just doesn't want to help and they don't like something, and then you go back and try and get a nice person. So the short answer is yes, they can do that. Yeah, yes, still Washington State, thankfully. Did you have a question?
No,
okay.
I was going to make a comment because we actually went to the Department.
Oh, did you? Oh.
And they required a social security number. A social security number. So even for an ID.
Because in Mount Vernon, right? But you can go somewhere else where they.
Yeah.
Because you can get your driver's license anywhere in the state, right? You don't have to do it in the city.
But I think you have to show that you're residing.
But I think you do have to have a social security number. I think you do have to have a social security number.
Yeah, they out now told me.
A good one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Maybe Jim knows about that. I gotta, ask Jim and the T-shirt, because I still have had clients have been able to get